Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the totally fascinating evolution of unfiltered reality in media. Think about the last gripping, raw documentary you just binged. What if I told you that exact style actually traces its roots back to a 19th century sewing machine? I know, it sounds impossible, but the history of how we curate reality is really one unbroken 130-year conversation. To actually understand the media we consume today, we've got to look back at the very moment the camera first cranked to life. Let's dive right into this massive paradox. You might think the raw, fly-on-the-wall style you see on streaming platforms today captures pure, unadulterated truth. But we really have to ask, is that actually possible? Back in the 1960s, filmmakers became completely obsessed with this idea. They wanted the camera to be so hidden, so unobtrusive, that the subject would literally forget it was there. But does the very act of observing change what we're looking at?
The crucial point is captured beautifully right here. The frame is a choice, not a fact. And honestly, this totally shatters the myth of the unbiased lens. Here's the ultimate irony of that 1960s quest for invisibility. In their attempt to just be a fly on the wall, filmmakers became the ultimate curators. The exact moment we hit record, we're making a choice about what reality actually means. We decide what's important and what's just background noise.
Now, looking at how this builds, it's a direct line of evolution. We start all the way back with a simple, silent clip in 1895 France, shifting right into the highly controlled state propaganda of the 40s and 50s. Then, bam, a massive rebellion sparks in the 1960s with direct cinema, breaking every rule in the book. And finally, that brings us to today, where the exact same strategies pioneered in the 60s are literally used to capture your attention online.
Now, what's really wild about this origin story is the completely utilitarian tech behind it all. Remember that sewing machine I mentioned? Well, the Lumière brothers didn't just invent a modern film camera out of thin air. They adapted a standard sewing machine claw to literally pull the film through their cinematography. From this basic mechanical hack, meant just to capture the rhythm of everyday life, a global revolution was born. Just 46 seconds. That's it. On a sunny day in 1895, right outside a factory in Lyon, France, the Lumière brothers captured a group of workers pouring out of the gates. The whole thing was roughly 46 seconds long. There was no plot, no main character, and absolutely no booming voiceover telling you how to feel. It was so raw, yet profoundly groundbreaking, because it was the very first time humanity saw itself in motion.
To really grasp why the 1960s rebellion was such a game changer, we have to look at what they were fighting against. The 40s and 50s documentary scene was basically hostage to the state. It was the era of the voice of God. You know the vibe, instructional, heavily narrated propaganda telling you exactly what to think. It was the death of curiosity. The 60s broke that mold entirely by stripping away the narration, bringing back the unpolished Lumière gaze, and forcing the audience to actually look closer and be detectives.
And this perfectly illustrates that shift. Take the groundbreaking 1960 film Primary, which followed John F. Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey. Suddenly, the audience wasn't being lectured. The filmmakers weren't taking sides or telling you who was winning. Instead, they zoomed in on mundane, unfiltered reality. An awkward silence, the granular reality of power, the literal sweat on a candidate's brow. That was the true Lumière spirit in action.
But of course, this intense quest for truth leads us smack into a philosophical brick wall, the curation paradox. It's this core concept recognizing that if the mere presence of a camera changes a subject's behavior, then a documentary is inherently a piece of fiction. We spend our whole lives searching for the real story, but this paradox tells us that capturing raw truth is an impossible illusion. The camera alters the room the second it enters.
Okay, so how on earth do you solve the problem of the camera altering reality? Well, in the 60s, it sparked a major philosophical clash. You had the American direct cinema movement, and they tried to solve it by hiding. Their whole goal was capturing life without interfering at all. But on the flip side, the French movement, Cinéma Vérité, championed the exact opposite. They argued, hey, the camera changes things, so you have to acknowledge the intrusion and actually engage with the subject.
The crazy thing is the technological echo fueling both of these eras, portability. The Lumière brothers beat out the competition back in 1895 because their rig was a portable box. Fast forward to the 1960s, and the revolution explodes thanks to lightweight 16mm cameras and portable sync sound recorders. And today, that evolution culminates right in the smartphone sitting in your pocket, creating zero distance between the lens and the subject.
This shift in portability didn't just change the gear, it completely rewired the filmmaker's psychology.
They were no longer tethered to heavy studio equipment. They morphed from rigid directors commanding a set into agile observers. They became hunter-gatherers of images, tracking subjects into chaotic crowds or quiet private rooms. The whole goal was to shrink that distance to the subject, a mindset we still use today.
Which brings us to a totally fascinating modern question. Is the algorithm you interact with every single day just the modern factory gate? I mean, the Lumières didn't have digital algorithms, but man, they understood human attention. They instinctively knew that a moving train arriving at a station would make people stop and stare. And that basic human instinct, that is exactly what drives today's click-through rates and thumbnail designs.
Those pioneers of the 60s didn't just borrow the Lumière legacy, they codified the content strategy rules we all play by today. They distilled it down to 3 essential practices. First, the observational hook. Let the subject start the story. Second, the curated reality, knowing that the edit is your argument. And finally, the human element, focusing on those granular, messy mistakes, because that's where the real human truth lives.
So as a content strategist today, balancing that hook with the story, your responsibility isn't to blast out pure, chaotic truth. That will just be a mess. Instead, your job is to show them your truth framed with intention. You have to curate your representation of reality with incredible care, framing it so well that the viewer completely forgets they're even looking at a screen.
We are absolutely living in a golden age where the Lumière spirit is completely democratized. The tools to capture reality are literally in your pocket. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. Every single time you hit record, you're joining a 130-year-old conversation. Now that you have this incredible power, how will you take responsibility for the frame, and how will you choose to light the stage?